I'm KM Best. Rise of the Phoenix season just started. Let's get you up to speed on the meta with the best decks to climb and to do Conquest with in the Rise of the Phoenix season. First up, the baseline of the metagame is still Bounce, but I don't necessarily think this is the best deck to play straight up. It's just here so you understand what the baseline best deck is, and then how the other decks are reacting to the existence of this deck in the metagame. So this is the typical base Bounce list. It's stripped out Falcon. It is just a good deck that does a bunch of good deck things. It is a very powerful list, and it is probably the number one list you need to be prepared for right now. Every deck needs a plan to beat Bounce, and frankly, Wave might cut it on ladder, will not cut it in a Conquest. So keep this deck in mind when deck building. And a lot of this video is going to be, we're going to be talking about things in the context of this deck, this matchup, and how that impacts what other decks are viable. So in terms of what deck I would play if I were you, I would be playing this. And this is like a Bounceless Bounce or Sarah-less Sarah, however you want to describe it. This deck is a reactive control deck leveraging Iron Man, leveraging Invisible Woman, leveraging Killmonger and Shang-Chi. And I think the core here to understand is I've been investigating, Invisible Woman, Killmonger, Shang-Chi in a ton of different shells. And what Am I, who built this deck, did is say, we can do it in a bunch of different shells, but the strongest shell fundamentally is the Bounce shell. We are in a potential tier 0 format where you just need to be doing the Bounce thing. And this enables you as a Bounce deck to win mirrors. So basically what you're giving up is the actual Bounce part, but what you're gaining is the ability to put a Killmonger under an Invisible Woman, blow up their kitty prides, blow up any demons they have. You can put a Killmonger or a Shang-Chi under an Invisible Woman, and from there it becomes a lot easier to win the pseudo mirrors against the Bounce list. So this is the list that I used to climb to infinity. I went, I believe, 58 and 18 with it, but who knows how reliable any of those numbers are given the way the climb is right now. That said, it is number one. I would play this list before I played any other list. I think it is a great way to react to a potentially super broken deck in Bounce by saying, I'm going to play the best version of this in the mirror. So I'm going to be favored in the mirrors, and that's enough to make this a truly elite deck. So how's High Evolutionary taking it? So for me, what I've done with my High Evolutionary Lockjaw is I've done a couple things. The first is we're back on Dracula. Wave is not sufficient. We're going for full points and avoiding Shang-Chi. The other thing we're doing is we're including Spider-Ham. And Spider-Ham might be a little bit of a weird card for you to see in this deck, but you get a Lockjaw flush with it, and Spider-Ham is very often going to hit either Iron Man or Shang-Chi out of the Bounce decks, and those cards are very important in their game plan against you. Those are the cards that they're going to use to swing a lane towards the end of the game, and if you can get rid of one of them, you can really restrict their options in the matchup. They rely on those cards pretty heavily against you, so Spider-Ham for me seems like a very, very reasonable consideration. And of course, the Dracula stuff, we're just getting points. We're getting points on the board, and hopefully it's points that, again, dodge Shang-Chi. So you can see how this deck is reacting to the existence of the Bounce deck and to the existence of the Bounceless Bounce deck. High Evolutionary Lockdown doing a little bit of a similar thing because the Bounceless Bounce deck is going to be running Killmonger. We've actually restricted our one-cost cards a little bit. I do think Nebula, Sunspot, probably a little bit too good to cut, but restricting our one-cost cards so we don't get completely blown out by Killmonger is worthwhile. We've also got a Professor X in here. Again, the Bounceless Bounce deck, not particularly great into Daredevil Professor X. Very scary thing to see on the opposing side. So this deck as well is reacting to Bounce. However, the worry it has is if the Lockjaw decks are playing Spider-Ham and Dracula, that matchup was already bad and gets just way worse once they start including Spider-Ham and Dracula. It's already very hard to deal with, and now this deck has, the Lockjaw deck is already a tough matchup. It might be getting harder thanks to the influence of Bounce, and I'm not even 100% convinced you actually beat Bounce as much as you really want to if you're going to play a deck like this. That said, if you're looking to just beat Bounce and you don't want to play like Bounce Mirrors with the Invisible Woman package, I think this is a reasonable and plausible place to start. The Daredevil does a lot of work in that matchup in terms of making sure you are always stealing a lane. Just the thing you have to worry about is if they have an Invisible Woman down, well, that Shang-Chi is going to kill your Hulk. So you definitely have to be aware of all the ways in which the deck can play. The Invisible Woman, Shang-Chi, Killmonger package is not only going in the Bounceless Bounce list, it's also going in basically any mid-range deck that can accommodate it. As you can see, this is one of the decks I completed an Infinite Conquest with last month, so if you want a more in-depth look at it, you can check that video out. I will link it in the description below. But the major thing that you're going to want to take away from this is just it's very easy to deal with bounce with this method rather than with wave or something like that, because you can attach this method to a lot more decks. When this deck was forced to run wave, it ended up in much clunkier situations because now you're using your entire turn 5 on wave. We don't really curve well with wave. It's not worth it. But suddenly, Invisible Woman and Killmonger really change the way that matchup plays out. It does a lot of work against bounce specifically, especially if they're relying heavily on Kitty Prides, if they're relying heavily on demons from the hood. A lot of things can go in your favor when you play this, and I think it's the best version of the Darkhawk mid-range deck right now. I am still an Electro rep believer, despite everything in me saying, you know, maybe it's just not consistent enough. I am still a believer in this list. I think especially the inclusion of Wong to really go over the top of your bad matchups in the form of the like Lockjaw deck. You're going to really be able to just do like Wong, Black Panther, Arnim Zola, they're dead. However, doing plays like that does leave you vulnerable to the decks let run Shang-Chi, so you do have to be a little bit more guarded in those matchups. That said, a lot of the decks that run Shang-Chi, Wave into Sandman is really good against them. Wave on 4 into Odin on 5 is really good against them. You have game in those matchups. The issue is how you navigate the rest of the game. So I think that Electro still remains powerful. It is probably towards the bottom of what I would recommend, but I personally think it is absolutely a recommended deck for sure. I'm a big fan of this list, especially given the consistency it has against these bounce decks. So now we're getting into a bit more speculative, tier 3-ish type stuff, but it's still stuff I felt like I wanted to put in the video. So with the bounce decks lowering their overall point potential, there is probably something there with Iron Patriot. And this list is a list I was playing that Den put together. He replaced Shocker, replaced Wasp with Shocker. I was just trying it. I think I would probably play Wasp instead of Shocker given the option, but I was pretty impressed with just the deck as a whole right now. And I think Patriot probably has a lot of room to explore. Right now, everyone is locked into Iron Patriot, but I'm kind of wondering what happens if we go back to the old style of Patriot. The only thing that's really keeping me from doing that, of course, is Invisible Woman Killmonger absolutely demolishes an Ultron, so we are still on this newfangled Iron Patriot style deck, and I do think, you know, change the Shocker for a Wasp if that's something you prefer. I do enjoy being able to actually curve out here. Wasp is sometimes only good when you're already doing the things you want to do, where Shocker is just like, I'm actually happy to see him a lot of the time. But I do think that there does need to be some experimentation with Patriot because the bounce lists, as they tech against the mirror, with that Killmonger, with that Shang-Chi, end up in a position where they're not putting that many points on the board a lot of the time. And if they're not putting that many points on the board, Patriot can really compete. I would be remiss if I did not put this list on the tier list. It won a tournament 2 weeks ago, and frankly, every time I've played it, I've felt like this is actually really strong. I have no idea if I can reasonably or plausibly recommend it, but I feel like it's awesome. Like, I really enjoyed playing this list in Conquest. It was really fun. I don't know if it's exactly the list you want to queue up for ladder, but just it does so many things. There are so many things in this deck, and it's not like they're going to know what to do against you because you don't know what you're doing. This deck's superpower is that it is impossible to play against. It's just unbelievably impossible to figure out what you are going to do because you have no idea what you're going to do until you do it. There are so many options in this list. I have really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I honestly feel like this is a very underrated deck right now, but there's a reason it's in the honorable mentions because it is incredibly difficult to play. I cannot overstate how difficult this list is to play. It makes your brain work very, very hard for good results, but you could probably get similar results without working your brain that hard. In our little honorable mention section, I have this list from Astrolad, aka Liberation. They're one of the players that I play a lot, or when MMR was such that you only ever played a few players at high MMR, this is one of those players. And this is the only Thanos list I've had any reasonable success with over the past few weeks. I am really impressed with it. It is a sort of small Thanos that looks to leverage small edges, looks to deal with Valkyrie, looks to deal with Spectrum. What you're really looking to do is scam one lane, then scam the other lane. Pretty familiar gameplay here. So, things you should worry about. Killmonger is very bad for you. If you want to put in armor, you are going to have to cut Shang-Chi. And if you want to put in armor, you are going to have to, like, put another tech card in there, probably. So, like, it would be armor and rogue going in so that you can at least deal with some of the big things that you want to deal with, because you can't play armor and Shang-Chi in the same deck. It's a very interesting list, but I do think the rise in Killmonger means that you're in a lot more trouble than you used to be if you run into these Invisible Woman Killmonger decks, and frankly, if you're playing anyone who knows what they're doing, you should be running into those Invisible Woman Killmonger decks at this point. One note I do want to say here is, when you play this list, keep in mind that Luke Cage means that your Valkyries don't affect your units. So do keep that in mind. By the same token, when your opponent has a Luke Cage, your Valkyrie doesn't do anything. So keep that in mind as well. Definitely worth noting. Finally, I'd like to highlight this Silver Surfer list by Equinox, who has pushed so many archetypes forward, and I have a lot of hope that she'll be able to do the same for this Silver Surfer archetype. Silver Surfer is an archetype that is very strong into Bounce. If you want a deck that beats Bounce, I suspect that this deck might be the deck for you. I think my major worry with this archetype is you are not favored into Lockjaw. You are whatever the opposite of favorite is. You need to be significantly better than them and scam them in order to have a chance in that matchup. Like, this is not the kind of deck that can deal with what Thanos Lockjaw does, or not Thanos Lockjaw, that with what High Evolutionary Lockjaw does well, which is put a ton of points on the board very cheaply across multiple lanes because you run Dr. Doom and Odin. Like, it is really hard to deal with that matchup. I would say it is significantly unfavored, but if you are not running into that matchup, or, you know, one of the things I was thinking about is maybe we could try fitting Invisible Woman and Shang-Chi into there and see how that does to swing the matchup. I'm interested in finding out. One thing I do want to praise for here is not playing any more Sarah, who is just an absolute Spider-Ham magnet, and frankly less game-winning if she doesn't get Spider-Hammed than Spider-Man is. When you're already playing a Storm deck, including Spider-Man is just such a smart thing to do. It lets you play as a real lane control deck, and I am really impressed with this deck generally. However, the the High Evolutionary Lockjaw matchup is tough. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's tough. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate all the messages of support that I've gotten recently with my cat's sickness. I can't respond to every one of them individually, but I just wanted to tell everyone who was watching, I thank you so much. It means the world to me to be able to log on to Twitter and see so many people wishing for my cat's health. I cannot express how grateful I am for those positive vibes that all of you have sent me. Thank you so much. And as of right now, she is at home, and we've got her on medication, and we're waiting on like a further diagnosis. So right now, I mean, I'm as happy as I can get given the waiting on a further diagnosis. She's home, and that's what matters to me. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate every single one of you that sent in a message like that. I don't have words. I've never been in this situation before, so thank you. And as always, I've been KM Best. I will see you next time. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a good one.